Moratherium was a rotund semi-aquatic mammal with short, stubby legs that lived about 37 to 35 million years ago. Its body shape and lifestyle demonstrate convergent evolution with tapirs and the pygmy hippopotamus. It was smaller than most or all later proboscideans, standing only 70 centimeters high at the shoulder and weighing 250 kilograms. The shape of the skull suggests that, while Moratherium did not have an elephant-like trunk, it may have had a broad flexible upper lip like a tapir's for grasping aquatic vegetation. The second incisor teeth formed small tusks, although these would have looked more like the teeth of a hippo than a modern elephant. The Barotheriids were the first large proboscideans to appear in the fossil records. Barotherium itself stood about 2 meters tall at the shoulder and weighed around 2 tons. It had 8 very short tusks, 4 each in the upper and lower jaws, which resembled those of a modern hippopotamus more than those of an elephant. The upper pairs were vertical, while the lower pairs projected forwards from the mouth horizontally. Together, these would have created a shearing action for cropping plants. There is disagreement about its nose. While it is now considered that Moratheriids did not possess a proboscis, Barotherium are often restored with one resembling that of a tapir or elephant seal. Phosphotherium was one of the very earliest known members of the proboscideans, a lineage today represented only by the 3 living species of elephants. Living in what is now Morocco during the late Paleocene and early Eocene, it would have been about the size of a cat, roughly 30 centimeters at the shoulder. It had a fairly low flat head with a proportionally short snout, while the back end of its skull behind its eyes was elongated, supporting large powerful jaw muscles. Where patterns on its teeth suggest it ate a lot of tough vegetation, and it may have been a semi-aquatic animal behaving somewhat like modern tapirs or pygmy hippos, spending a lot of the daytime lounging in water, and emerging onto land to forage during the night. Duotherium is an extinct genus of early proboscideans that lived during the early Eocene some 55 million years ago in North Africa. It is estimated to have weighed between 80 and 170 kilograms, making it one of the earliest large mammals known from Africa and one of the oldest known proboscideans. It is known only from lower jaws and associated cheek teeth. It had lophodont and bilophodont molars. The second and third premolars had a notably large cusp called the hypoconid. Numidotherium, an early proboscidean, had a shoulder height of 1 meter and featured a short trunk and long legs. Its skull, 40 centimeters long, had a raised cranial roof and widely spreading zygomatic arches, with air-filled bones that facilitated larger attachment points for neck muscles. It exhibited preliminary stages of tusk formation, with enlarged incisors and a reduction in teeth compared to older proboscideans. The elongated outer nasal cavities in Numidotherium suggest the presence of a short proboscis, although its low-crowned molars indicate specialization in relatively soft vegetation, indicating a terrestrial lifestyle. Analysis of its postcranial skeleton suggests slightly bowed limbs and a semi-plantigrade posture, contrasting with the column-like limbs of modern elephants. Additionally, its cochlea differed from that of modern elephants, potentially indicating a different range of auditory perception, with a focus on higher frequency sounds. Deinotheriidae is a family of prehistoric elephant-like proboscideans that lived during the Cenozoic era. They changed very little, apart from growing much larger in size. By the late Miocene, they had become the largest land animals of their time. Their most distinctive features were their lack of upper tusks and downward curving tusks on the lower jaw. Each new genus replacing the preceding one. They were browsers, meaning they ate plants above ground level. Deinotheriidae possibly ate specific dicots. These could be found in closed woodland forests. The way they chewed their food was probably similar to that of modern tapirs, with the front teeth being used to crush the food, while the second and third molars have a strong vertical shearing action, with little lateral movement. Although its appearance is reminiscent of modern elephants, Deinotherium possessed a notably more flexible neck, with limbs adapted to a more cursorial lifestyle, as well as tusks which grew down and curved back from the lower jaw, as opposed to the upper mandible tusks seen in extant elephants. They were primarily browsing animals, with a diet largely consisting of leaves. The genus most likely went extinct due to environmental changes, such as forested areas gradually being replaced by open grasslands, during the latter half of the Neogene. One of the most enigmatic features of Deinotherium are their downturned tusks and their function. Research conducted on a specimen suggests that these tusks were likely not used for digging, nor are they sexually dimorphic, leaving use in feeding as their most likely function. These tusks exhibit patterns of wear, in particular on their medial and caudal sides. It could have used its tusks to remove branches that would have gotten in the way of feeding, while using the proboscis to transport leaf material into its mouth. Usually considered an ancestor or near ancestor of elephants or mastodons, Paleomastodon lived in marshes and fluvial deltaic environments of what is North Africa and Asia Minor. It possessed both maxillary and mandibular tusks. The mandibular tusks projected anteriorly and were generally flat and scoop-like. They were probably used to scrape the bark off trees and uproot various plants. The form, size, and capabilities of Paleomastodon nasal structures have long been debated. Though often depicted with a relatively small, prehensile proboscis, some argued that where patterns on the lower tusks better favored the presence of a large, retractile upper lip. Phiomia was a primitive proboscidean of the Oligocene that was still quite similar in appearance to a modern elephant. One of the key features about Phiomia was the lower mouth where two tusks grew forwards into a shovel-like structure. This may have been used to shovel up plants from out of the ground, or perhaps even to strip bark off of trees. It vaguely resembled a modern elephant, although, based on the shape of its nasal bones, it had only a very short trunk. It had short tusks on the upper jaw and also short shovel-like tusks on the lower jaw that were most likely used for gathering food. The American mastodon resembled a woolly mammoth in appearance, with a thick coat of shaggy hair. It was about 3 meters in height at the shoulder and reached a weight of about 6 tons. However, mastodons' teeth differ dramatically from those of members of the elephant family. They had blunt, conical, nipple-like projections on the crowns of their molars, which were more suited to chewing leaves than the high-crowned teeth mammoths used for grazing. The name mastodon means nipple teeth and is also an obsolete name for their genus. Their skulls are larger and flatter than those of mammoths, while their skeleton is stockier and more robust. Its tusks sometimes exceeded 5 meters in length. They curved upwards, but less dramatically than those of the woolly mammoth. The tusks were probably used to break branches and twigs, although some evidence suggests males may have used them in mating challenges. It is theorized that the damage was caused when the males were fighting over mating rights. The curved shape of the tusks would have forced them downward with each blow, causing damage to the newly forming ivory at the base of the tusk. The regularity of the damage in the growth patterns of the tusks indicates that this was an annual occurrence, probably occurring during the spring and early summer. Coeurolophodon is first known during the early Miocene in Africa and South Asia. They subsequently dispersed across Asia and into Southeast Europe. Dental microwear analysis of specimens from Greece suggests that these individuals were grazers, while mesowear analysis of specimens from East Africa suggests varying browsing and grazing-dominated mixed feeding diets, depending on locality. It had a relatively large body size, but not as large as some of the later proboscideans like mammoths or modern elephants, with a length of 2-5 meters. Like other typical gomphotheres, Amebelodon possessed two sets of tusks, one upper set and one lower set that extended from the very front of the lower jaws. However, as mentioned above, its lower tusks were distinctive in that they were relatively long, slender, and flattened. Because of the resemblance of these lower tusks to shovels, it is commonly referred to as a shovel-tusked gomphothere. There has long been an assumption that these lower tusks were actually used as shovels by the animal during feeding, presumably to dig up water plants. For reasons that are not clearly explained in the literature, Amebelodon is usually portrayed with a short, flap-like trunk. However, considerable evidence indicates that it actually had a long, flexible trunk very much like that found in modern elephants, and that it probably was important for feeding and drinking. Platybelodon is probably the most famously weird member of the Proboscideans, looking like some sort of deliberately outrageous speculative creature design. These strange-looking proboscideans stood around 2.2 meters tall and had fairly standard elephant-like bodies, but also heads with bizarre-looking elongated lower jaws that ended in a wide flat shovel-like shape tipped by two flat tusks. It was originally interpreted as a swamp-dwelling animal using its weird jaw to scoop up soft aquatic vegetation, with a fairly short flat trunk. But more recent studies of the wear patterns on its teeth suggest it actually used them more like a scythe than a shovel, cutting through tough grasses and branches, a feeding style that would also require it to have a much more modern elephant-like trunk, using it to hold onto plants while it was sawing through them. In the past, Nathobelodon has been considered to be the same elephant as the closely related Gomphotherium, though today Nathobelodon is still usually treated as a distinct genus. It has been called the spoon-billed mastodon since its lower jaw was elongated and shaped like a shoehorn or spoon. It is endemic to North America that includes species that lived during the Middle to Late Miocene. They are distinct in having no lower tusks, whilst the shovel tuskers have broad, flattened lower tusks. With respect to dentition and overall body form, it was similar to species of Gomphotherium, but some recover Nathobelodon as closer to brevirostrine Gomphotheriids than to Gomphotherium. The oldest remains of Gomphotherium are known from Africa, dating to approximately 19 million years ago. They migrated into Eurasia across the Gomphotherium land bridge and underwent rapid evolution after its arrival in Eurasia, reaching its peak diversity during the early Middle Miocene. It has been posited to be paraphyletic and the ancestor of later Gomphothere genera. Gomphotherium first arrived in North America during the mid-Miocene, approximately 16 to 15 million years ago, and is suggested to be ancestral to later New World Gomphotherium genera. Like most primitive Elephantimorphs, it had an elongated lower jaw which bore tusks. It was similar in size to the Asian elephant. Most species of Gomphotherium are inferred to have been browsers or mixed feeders. These animals had horizontal tooth replacement, where teeth would progressively migrate towards the front of the jaws before they were taken the place of by more posterior teeth. Unlike modern elephants, many Gomphotheres retained permanent premolar teeth, though they were absent in some Gomphothere genera. Earlier Gomphotheres had lower jaws with an elongate mandibular symphysis and lower tusks, the primitive condition for members of Elephantomorpha. Later members developed shortened lower jaws and vestigial or no lower tusks, a convergent process that occurred multiple times among Gomphotheres, as well as other members of Elephantomorpha. The incisors and long lower jaws of primitive Gomphotheres were likely used for cutting vegetation, while brevirostrine Gomphotheres relied on their trunks to acquire food similar to modern elephants. Sinomastodon bumiajuensis lived on the island of Java during the early Pleistocene, about 2 to 1.5 million years ago. It stood around 2 meters tall at the shoulder, less than half the size of most other Sinomastodon species from mainland Asia. Although it looked convergently similar to modern elephants, it was actually a member of the Gomphotheriidae, much more closely related to the weird shovel-tuskers than to any living species. Also, most species are browsers animals. This particular species had a more variable alimentation. Sinomastodon, in comparison to earlier Gomphotheriidae, had a shortened lower jaw that lacked permanent tusks. The skull was proportionally relatively short. The upper tusks, which are circular in cross-section, are upward curving and lack enamel bands. Cuvier immediately stands out from amongst other elephants with its curved spirally twisting trunks, which are often described as narwhal-like. However, something else which this elephant is more famous for is that at the time of writing it is one of 2 genera of elephants that are known to have lived in South America. Roughly 3 million years ago, volcanic activity created the Isthmus of Panama, an event that would have world-changing consequences, but specifically for the Americas this was the first time that these 2 continents had been directly connected by a permanent land bridge. This triggered another event called the Great American Interchange, where some South American animals spread up into North America, and some North American animals, including Cuvier spread down into South America. This elephant is known to have lived in South America with Stegomastodon, but usually 2 animals cannot share the same niche in an ecosystem. This does not seem to have been a problem for these 2 elephants, however, since Stegomastodon is known from the warmer lowland areas and Cuvier is associated with higher, cooler environments that you find associated with the Andes mountain range. Although not the largest of prehistoric elephants, Ananchus stands out from the crowd with its greatly elongated tusks which could reach lengths of up to 4 meters, almost as long as the body. These tusks, which were like in all elephants' modified teeth, are thought to have been used to root up plants that were in front of it. Once loosened up, Ananchus could then take a few steps forward and pick the plants up with its trunk. This kind of foraging behavior would have allowed Ananchus to specialize in feeding upon plants that were beyond the capability of herbivores. It already has a more modern elephant body form, particularly with its shorter neck. The legs of Ananchus, however, were still proportionately shorter than they were in modern forms. Probably because of the ongoing series of glaciations changing the environment, as well as competition from mammoths that were better adapted to live in this environment, these elephants went extinct at the beginning of the Pleistocene. Despite possibly looking a lot like the elephants of today, Stegodon had a very remarkable feature. Its tusks could grow to be 3 meters long, about a third of a bus length, and almost as long as its entire body. Unlike its more famous long-tusked cousins, the mammoths, Stegodon's tusks sometimes grew so close together that there wasn't enough space for its trunk to lie in between. Older individuals may have needed to carry their trunk sideways over one of the tusks. Like modern elephants, Stegodon was probably a capable swimmer, and that may be how it colonized a number of islands throughout Asia from the Philippines to Japan. Some of those isolated populations then suffered from a phenomenon called insular dwarfism, in which big animals progressively get smaller after several generations living in small islands due to the limited space and available food. In the past, stegodons were believed to be the ancestors of the true elephants and mammoths, but currently they are believed to have no modern descendants. It is likely derived from Stegolophodon, an extinct genus known from the Miocene of Asia, with transitional fossils between the 2 genera known from the late Miocene of Southeast Asia and Yunnan in South China. Stegodon is more closely related to elephants and mammoths than to mastodons. Like elephants, stegodontids are believed to have derived from Gomphotheriidae. The best preserved Stegodon aurori skeleton, that from Taga in Shiga Prefecture, stands to a shoulder height of 2 meters, with a body length of 4.5 meters. It is relatively short-legged, the ratio between vertebral column length and shoulder height being 0.88. Similar as it was to the charismatic elephants of our time, Stegodon was something unique. Even though the word elephant may conjure a very uniform concept, a big gray animal with pillar-like legs, floppy ears and a big trunk, the two groups of elephants alive today are very distinct and separated by at least 5 million years of evolution. Asian elephants and African elephants may look like close relatives, but they took very different paths throughout their history, which are reflected in their different anatomies and geographical distribution. An even larger gap separates those forms of Stegodon. Much like Japan, ancient Flores had a succession of dwarf stegodontids, close relatives of modern elephants that were capable of island hopping through Indonesia by swimming. Stegodon sandari lived on Flores during the early Pleistocene, about 900,000 years ago, and was the size of a small water buffalo at just 1.2 meters tall at the shoulder. It had proportionally short legs, which may have been an adaptation to clambering over rough terrain and steep inclines. Around 850,000 years ago it disappeared from Flores, probably due to a large volcanic eruption, but a new wave of stegodontids quickly recolonized the island. The mid-sized Stegodon florensis probably originated from either Java to the west or Sulawesi to the north, and eventually evolved into a new dwarfed subspecies. An estimate based on the size of limb bones collected from Sahabi suggests that Stegotetrabelodon may have reached 4 meters in shoulder height and 12 tons in weight. In comparison to later elephantids, it has several primitive features, including the retention of permanent premolar teeth, an elongated mandibular symphysis and large lower tusks, shared with its Gomphotheriidae ancestors. The lower tusks are the longest known among proboscideans, reaching a length of over 2 meters, though they weighed only around 12 kilograms, with the upper tusks also being large, reaching a length of almost 3 meters and weight exceeding 40 kilograms. A small contingent of Emirates Natural History Group members found several sets of proboscidean footprints thought to have probably been produced by Stegotetrabelodon preserved in a large calcareous exposure between the sand dunes in the western region of the Emirate of Abu Dhabi. The longest of these tracks extend for 290 meters. These tracks suggest that, like modern elephants, Stegotetrabelodon lived in herds. Primelephas is a genus of Elephantini that existed during the Miocene and Pliocene epochs. The name of the genus suggests first elephant. These primitive elephantids are thought to be the common ancestor of the mammoths and the closely allied genera Elephas and Loxodonta, diverging some 6 to 4 million years ago. It had 4 tusks, which is a trait not shared with its descendants, but common in earlier proboscideans. The modern genera of elephants and mammoths had diverged from each other by the end of the Miocene, around 5 million years ago. Elephantids began to migrate out of Africa during the Pliocene, with mammoths and elephas arriving in Eurasia around 3 million years ago. Most species of Paleoloxodon are noted for their distinctive parieto-occipital crests present at the top of the cranium, which was used to anchor the splenius as well as possibly the rhomboid muscles to support the skull, which is proportionally large in comparison to other elephants. The ancestor of the Naumann's elephant moved from the Eurasian continent to Japan via a land bridge. It subsequently evolved independently and spread throughout Japan after the land bridge was covered by rising seawaters. It was hunted by the inhabitants of the time. Some fossils were found around Lake Nagiri in Nagano Prefecture, together with many lithic and bone tool artifacts. The Asian straight-tusked elephant was a species of prehistoric elephant that ranged throughout Pleistocene India. Some authorities regard it to be a subspecies of Paleoloxodon antiquus, due to extreme similarities of the tusks. Their skull structure was also different from that of a modern elephant. Several studies have attempted to estimate the size of the Asian straight-tusked elephants, as well as other prehistoric proboscideans, usually using comparisons of thigh bone length and knowledge of relative growth rates to estimate the size of incomplete skeletons. Studies comparing Asian straight-tusked elephant with other extinct and extant proboscideans have helped to contextualize its size. It appears to have been larger than most other proboscideans, including other members of the Paleoloxodon genus and even some of the largest mammoths. Based on skeletal remains and comparisons with living elephants, scientists estimate that it weighed several tons, possibly exceeding 19 tons in some particularly large individuals. Over on isolated Cyprus, the only native large mammals were the miniature hippos and an equally miniature elephant. Cyprus dwarf elephant was smaller than the Aegean Paleoloxodontines, about 1.4 meters tall, and much like its cousin on Telos seems to have evolved very recently towards the end of the Pleistocene, sometime around 20,000 years ago. Similarly to the hippos it lived alongside, it disappeared shortly after humans arrived on Cyprus, between 12,000 and 10,000 years ago. Collections of its bones have been found in a rock shelter with evidence of having been burnt, suggesting that it was being actively hunted and cooked. Telos dwarf elephant stood about 1.8 meters tall, on the larger side for a dwarf Mediterranean elephant but still one of the smallest Paleoloxodontines in the Aegean region. Several thousand specimens have been found, and radiocarbon dating shows it was a fairly recent evolutionary development, appearing just 45,000 years ago in the late Pleistocene. This dwarf elephant was also the very latest surviving of its entire kind, living well into the Holocene until at least 4000 BC. This is several thousand years after humans first arrived on Telos, suggesting it was a rare case of an island elephant that managed to endure the effects of a human presence for quite some time. Over on Sicily and Malta, which were also occasionally a single island when sea levels were lower, there were several different species of miniature elephant during the mid to late Pleistocene, each with a different body size and occupying its own ecological niche. Dwarf Sicilian elephant was both the smallest of the Mediterranean dwarfs and possibly the smallest elephant to ever exist. Just 1 meter tall, it had adult body proportions resembling the juveniles of its ancestors, limbs adapted for running and clambering over rough terrain, and a proportionally enormous brain relative to its body size. Around 200,000 years ago a sea level drop allowed new colonization from the Italian mainland. If it was still around at that time it likely didn't survive long with new competition from large herbivores like bison and deer, and being preyed on by newly arriving large carnivores like wolves, lions and hyenas. Another small elephant soon evolved to take its place, although due to the presence of predators it was never able to get nearly so tiny. Malta dwarf elephant was in fact one of the largest dwarf elephants in the Mediterranean, standing about 2 meters tall, but despite its larger size its limbs still show signs of adaptation for more fast and agile movement. Its tusks also show a lot of variation in shape, with some much more curved and twisted than others. This elephant had disappeared by about 13,000 years ago, probably due to the climate significantly warming towards the end of the last ice age. Much like Sardinia, the earliest arrival of humans on Sicily and Malta is controversial, and it's unclear whether they ever encountered these elephants. The earliest definite date for Sicily is about 16,000 years ago, so a human-induced extinction can't be ruled out entirely. The subfossil remains of the Sicula Maltese elephants may have also ended up inspiring legends of the Cyclops, as their skulls would have resembled large human ones with the nasal cavity forming a single big eye socket. African elephants are the actual largest land animals on Earth, with males reaching heights of up to 4 meters at the shoulder and weighing as much as 6,000 kilograms. Both male and female possess tusks, which are elongated incisor teeth. These tusks can grow to impressive lengths, with some individuals having tusks over 2 meters long. Unfortunately, they are often targeted by poachers for their ivory, leading to significant population declines. They live in complex social groups led by older females known as matriarchs. Male elephants tend to live more solitary lives, joining herds only during mating seasons or when seeking companionship. They are highly intelligent animals with complex cognitive abilities. They have excellent memories, they can remember long-term social bonds, migration routes and the locations of water sources and food, they can solve problems and exhibit behaviors such as empathy and altruism. They are also known to display signs of mourning and grief when a member of their herd dies. They are deeply intertwined with the cultural heritage of many African communities and are revered in various traditional beliefs and practices. African bush elephants are considered a keystone species, meaning they play a critical role in maintaining the biodiversity and ecological balance of their habitats. Their feeding and movement patterns create clearings in forests, which benefit other species, and their dung provides essential nutrients for soil health. The trunk is an incredibly versatile appendage, containing over 100,000 muscles. It is used for various tasks such as breathing, smelling, touching, grasping objects and even producing sounds. They produce a wide range of vocalizations, including infrasound frequencies that are too low for human ears to detect. These low-frequency calls can travel long distances and are used for long-distance communication among individuals and herds. Despite their size, they are surprisingly good swimmers and enjoy bathing and playing in water. They require regular access to water sources for drinking and cooling off, often digging for water in dry riverbeds during the dry season. African elephants exhibit complex social behaviors and demonstrate a high level of social intelligence. They form strong bonds with family members and other herd members, communicate through a variety of vocalizations and body language and cooperate to solve problems and protect their young. They display a wide range of emotions, like joy, grief, anger, and empathy. They have been observed comforting distressed individuals, mourning the loss of loved ones and celebrating reunions with members of their herd. The African forest elephant is the other one recognized species of African elephants. They primarily inhabit the dense tropical rainforests of Central and West Africa. They have adapted to living in the understory of these dense forests. They are slightly smaller than African savanna elephants, with males typically standing around 2.5 meters tall at the shoulders. They have straighter and thinner tusks compared to savanna elephants. They are known for their shy and elusive nature, making them more challenging to study than savanna elephants. They often travel in small family groups led by a matriarch, and their social structure tends to be more fluid compared to savanna elephants. They are considered keystone species that play a vital role in maintaining the health and biodiversity of their forest habitats. Their feeding and browsing activities create gaps in the vegetation, allowing sunlight to reach the forest floor and promoting plant diversity. African forest elephants have experienced significant population declines in recent decades. It is estimated that their numbers have decreased by at least 60% over the past 50 years due to habitat loss, fragmentation, and poaching for ivory. Deforestation and habitat fragmentation pose major threats. Logging, agriculture and infrastructure development are encroaching upon their forest habitats, leading to habitat loss and degradation. The African mammoth is the oldest representative of the genus Mammuthus, known from around 6 to 4 million years ago during the late Miocene-early Pliocene in what is today South Africa and countries of East Africa, especially Ethiopia. Like many elephant lineages, mammoths seem to come from Africa. They already presented some of the unique characteristics of mammoths like the spirally, twisting tusks. Isotope analysis of specimens from South Africa suggests that it was a flexible feeder. Southern mammoth is one of the earliest mammoths in the fossil record and is often treated as a possible progenitor species for some of the later mammoths. One of the most interesting aspects about this mammoth is that it does not seem to have specialized in eating grasses like later species of mammoth. Examination of fossil sites indicates that the southern mammoth was more at home in woodland habitats that had a variety of trees and shrubs that it could browse from. The molar teeth also show adaptations to eating leaves with the presence of ridges running atop of low crowns. Because these woodland ecosystems are generally warmer than open plains, the southern mammoth is not thought to have had the dense covering of fur that is known in later species. However, as the Pleistocene period progressed, an ongoing series of ice sheets expanded and receded back and forth across the land. This saw a change of the landscape to mostly grassy plain habitats as a result of these glaciations, something that necessitated a shift towards the primarily grassy diet of later species. Steppe mammoths are thought to have been grazers to grazing predominant mixed feeders, distinct from southern mammoth. It was often associated with cold steppe environments, as its common name would suggest, but was not confined to them. It was one of the largest mammoth species, with males on average being about 4 meters tall at the shoulders and about 11 tons. Sequenced genome suggests that early Pleistocene specimens from Siberia, around 1 million years old, had already developed many of the genetic changes thought to be responsible for traits that were adaptations for living in cold environments characteristic of woolly mammoths. Due to the cold climates it inhabited and short tail, it is suggested to have borne a coat of fur, which was probably somewhat thinner than that of the woolly mammoth. The Columbian mammoth appears to have been one of the most common mammoths roaming North America during the Pleistocene, and is thought to have come from mammoths that crossed the Bering Land Bridge from Asia into North America during the early Pleistocene at the latest. This would have been possible by fluctuating sea levels that would have been constantly rising and falling in connection with decreasing and increasing glaciations. Compared to other mammoths, it is generally thought to have had a reduced covering of hair from those that were active in Eurasia. This is based upon the fact that North America is generally considered to have been warmer and less frozen than Europe during the Pleistocene, and an extensive covering of hair would have actually hindered the Columbian mammoth's ability to cope with the warmer conditions. It was one of the largest species of mammoth. It had long, curved tusks and 4 molars at a time, which were replaced 6 times during the lifetime of an individual. It most likely used its tusks and trunk like modern elephants, for manipulating objects, fighting and foraging. Bones, hair, dung, and stomach contents have been discovered, but no preserved carcasses are known. The Columbian mammoth preferred open areas, such as parkland landscapes, and fed on sedges, grasses, and other plants. The woolly mammoth was one of the last in a line of mammoth species. It began to diverge from the steppe mammoth about 800,000 years ago in Siberia. The appearance and behavior of this species are among the best studied of any prehistoric animal because of the discovery of frozen carcasses in Siberia and North America, as well as skeletons, teeth, stomach contents, dung, and depiction from life in prehistoric cave paintings. Mammoth remains had long been known in Asia before they became known to Europeans in the 70th century. The woolly mammoth was roughly the same size as modern African elephants. It was well adapted to the cold environment during the last ice age. It was covered in fur, with an outer covering of long guard hairs and a shorter undercoat. The color of the coat varied from dark to light. The ears and tail were short to minimize frostbite and heat loss. It had long, curved tusks and 4 molars, which were replaced 6 times during the lifetime of an individual. Its behavior was similar to that of modern elephants, and it used its tusks and trunk for manipulating objects, fighting and foraging. The diet of the woolly mammoth was mainly grasses and sedges. Individuals could probably reach the age of 60. The woolly mammoth coexisted with early humans, who used its bones and tusks for making art, tools and dwellings, and hunted the species for food. The population of woolly mammoths declined at the end of the late Pleistocene, with the last populations on mainland Siberia persisting until around 10,000 years ago. Cretan dwarf mammoth was originally thought to also be a Paleoloxodontine, but more recent studies of its anatomy and ancient DNA have confirmed it was indeed another tiny mammoth. It was probably descended from either the southern mammoth, which would have arrived on Crete during the late Pliocene or early Pleistocene between about 3.5 and 1 million years ago. Isolated on Crete, with no predators and living at a time when the island was much smaller, it quickly dwarfed and became the tiniest known mammoth to ever exist, standing just 1 meter tall at the shoulder. Not much is known about its ecology, but its teeth suggest it was a browser feeding on leaves and shrubs, possibly filling a similar niche to the mid-sized deer that came later. Sardinian mammoth lived on the island of Sardinia during the Middle and Late Pleistocene. Standing around 1.4 meters tall at the shoulder, it was a dwarf form roughly one-third the size of its ancestor, the huge Eurasian steppe mammoth. Its remains are known only from the west and south of the island. Strangely, it appears to have been absent from the nearby island of Corsica, despite the two being joined as a single landmass a few times during lower sea level periods in the Pleistocene. It's not clear why this mini-mammoth disappeared. The date of the earliest human settlement of Sardinia is controversial, so it might never have actually encountered them. Over on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, at least 60,000 years ago, some huge Columbian mammoths swam the 6.5 kilometers distance to the ancient island of Santa Rosa, a landmass that today is mostly submerged, with its remaining peaks forming the modern California Channel Islands. With a lack of large predators and then steadily rising sea levels reducing the available habitat on their new home, the mammoths shrank into a dwarfed species known as the pygmy mammoth. Standing around 1.7 meters at the shoulder, they were less than half the size of their ancestors and had only about 10% of the body mass. They survived until about 13,000 years ago, around the same time that early Paleo-Indians arrived. While they may also have been hunted by humans, the warming post-glacial climate is currently thought to be the main factor in their extinction, changing the types of vegetation on their still shrinking islands and reducing fresh water sources. Asian elephants are renowned for their intelligence and complex cognitive abilities. They are herbivores with a diverse diet that includes grasses, leaves, bark, fruit, and roots. They consume large quantities of vegetation each day, foraging for food over extensive areas. They have deep cultural significance in many Asian countries, where they are revered in religious, cultural, and artistic traditions. They are often associated with wisdom, strength, and good fortune and feature prominently in festivals, folklore, and mythology. But they mostly play a crucial role in maintaining the health and biodiversity of their ecosystems. As keystone species, they shape vegetation patterns, create habitat heterogeneity, and facilitate seed dispersal, benefiting numerous other species within their habitats. Unlike African elephants, where tusklessness is rare, a significant proportion of female Asian elephants are naturally tuskless. This trait is believed to be a genetic adaptation to reduce the risk of ivory poaching in regions where elephants are heavily targeted for their tusks. They have participated in various cognitive studies to assess their problem-solving abilities, memory, and social cognition. They have demonstrated remarkable intelligence, capable of learning complex tasks, recognizing themselves in mirrors, and cooperating with humans in tasks such as painting and music. One of the most significant threats to Asian elephants is habitat loss and fragmentation due to human activities such as deforestation, agriculture, urbanization, and infrastructure development. As forests are cleared for timber, agriculture, and human settlements, elephant habitats become fragmented, leading to habitat loss and increased human-elephant conflict. They are targeted by poachers for their ivory tusks, which are highly valued in illegal wildlife trade markets. Despite international bans on ivory trade, poaching continues to pose a significant threat to elephant populations, particularly in regions where law enforcement is weak and demand for ivory remains high. They are at risk of electrocution from power lines and railway accidents when they come into contact with electrified fences and railway tracks. These incidents often result in injury or death for elephants and are a significant concern in areas where human infrastructure intersects with elephant habitats. Climate change poses a threat to Asian elephant habitats by altering precipitation patterns, temperature regimes, and the distribution of vegetation. Changes in weather patterns can affect the availability of water and food resources, leading to increased competition between elephants and humans and further exacerbating human-elephant conflict.